Hey guys, it's Alan from GameCraft Miniatures. I want to take a few minutes and talk to you guys about the MatBoard buildings that are offered on the site and tell you a little about the material and how to work with it and how to get great results. As you can see from some of these buildings here, it's possible to get some pretty nice results using this material. Here's some of the new science fiction modern buildings, and they can get pretty fancy. And these are made of the MatBoard material. Now, what is MatBoard material? This is a material that is used in the picture framing industry to make mats. They cut out, normally you see beveled cuts, and they cut out a border, and then this goes over a photograph or a painting or something like that. The process is called matting, and that's why it's called MatBoard. It is technically a paper product, but it's not a paper product in the same way that this is a paper product. This is a very hard material. It's just about as thick as the acrylic that we use for many of the kits, which is 1/16 of an inch, or about 1.5 millimeters. This is very nearly the same thickness. This is exactly 0.050 inches. That's not terribly important, but just to let you know that it is a fairly thick material, and like I said, it's very rigid. It feels like a wood material, actually. If MDF came in this thickness in America, I would probably be using MDF in this thickness, but it doesn't, so I've selected this material, and I really like it a lot, and I use it a lot myself. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The amount of detail that you can get when laser cutting this material, I hope you can see this. If not, I'll post a still picture to the video. Or this piece here with this little detail work in here. This type of detail cannot be achieved using acrylic, because acrylic is a plastic, and in the laser cutting process heat is generated, and these very fine little detailed parts actually get very hot, and they get soft, and they warp, and they change shape. They don't keep their shape the way this material does. Some of these parts on here are so terribly thin, but the detail is incredible. So that's why I really like this material. So I really like the material. I use it a lot. If you've seen pictures of my bombed out World War II city, every single piece on that board is made with this material. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like a paper building. They're very nice, I think. It is. So I really like the material. I use it a lot. If you've seen pictures of my bombed out World War II city, every single piece on that board is made with this material. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like a paper building. They're very nice, I think. So what we need to assemble these kits, here's a very basic kit here. This is a ruined building, just 4 walls that interlock. If you were building this building here, these are the way they go, you would need some sort of glue, of course. The best glue for using this material is something called Tacky Glue. Tacky Glue is something that's available here in America. I'm not sure if it's available elsewhere. However, I do see that the label is in several languages, so it probably is. This is very much like your standard white school glue, but it's thicker. And the thickness of it is very important. That's what makes it tacky. So when you put some glue on a part and you put 2 parts together, they tend to want to stay together. They don't just fall apart. It's not magic, it's not instant, but it holds a lot better initially than a regular white glue. Now, if all you have is regular white school glue, that works fine. If you have the yellow type wood glue, that works fine. You can even use instant glues like a CA glue, as long as it's the medium variety or the thick, Don't use the water-thin variety. They won't work very well. Sometimes when I'm in a hurry putting something together just to take a picture for the website, sometimes I'll use CA glue with a little bit of accelerator, a little spray accelerator. But the Tacky Glue is what I really recommend. If you can find it, use it. It's the best thing to use. You'll also want something to square up the parts and make sure that everything's 90 degrees. A little metal block like this is a very nice thing to have. I can set this down, set a part here, put another part up against it, and when I glue these together, I know that that's exactly 90 degrees. This is a little fancy for a lot of model makers. You may not have anything like this. If you want to pick one up and you're in the States, look at micromark.com. I think they're about $13, and it's a very nice thing to have around. But basically anything that you know is square. Just a simple block of wood might work, but you better know that it's square. So anything that you can just set down and set your parts against. So those are the two basic things you need to start the basic assembly. We'll get into the finishing and things like that later. So what I like to do is, when I have a building that has 4 walls on it, separate these two away from these two, or any two away from the other two, and I will set this down here, figure out how it goes together. Say that's the way it goes together. Beautiful. Okay, just a little check fit. Take my Tacky Glue, and I'll put a little bit, I hope we can see this on the video, but just put a little bit on each one of the tabs and on the inside of the slots. You'll develop your own technique for how to best do this, but this is the way I do it. And if it looks like it's on there a little thick, I'll just kind of wipe a little bit of it off with my finger. I'll just put them together, make sure they're good and together. Everything's at 90 degrees. Looks good. Then I'll usually have a toothpick handy, and I'll just wipe away the little bit of excess that came oozing out into the inside. Optional step, but it's something I like to do. Once you've got that done, turn this way. And I'm going to go ahead and use this edge here to do the other 2 pieces. Same way, a little bit of Tacky Glue. Come on, there we go. Put the parts together. Okay. Just rub that little excess around in there so it doesn't glob up. I'll let this sit for just a couple of minutes and let these parts start to cure, and then I'll put the 2 assemblies together. Okay, well, I've let these parts sit for literally about a minute or 2. It doesn't take very long for that glue to start to cure. So now what I want to do is take the 2 sort of sub-assemblies and put them together. So what I'll do is I'll take one of them and just go around with the Tacky Glue on the tabs and a little bit on the slots. Oops. That's a little much. And then just take the 2 pieces and put them together. Now I don't need to use the metal block this time to make sure everything's squared up, because this one's square and this one's square, so there's really no way they're going to get out of square now. So I just push them together. A little tiny bit of glue oozes out the crack here. Just wipe that off with my finger. Just kind of push them together for a minute and let that glue start to catch. And there's your basic building together, just using the Tacky Glue and a little metal block to keep things squared up. So that's the first step, just getting the model assembled. A little bit of glue oozing out on the inside corners, smooth that out. So the next step in building these, or finishing them, is going to be sealing the material. This is an optional step. This is something that I like to do, and I do it to all my models, even my MDF kits. I spray them with a product called lacquer sanding sealer. This is made by Deft. I order this from Amazon.com because I can't find a local retailer of this, so it's easy to get that way. This is a material that's normally used to spray on wood to seal it, basically. It does the same thing to this material. If you spray the entire model inside and out, it does a couple of things. It seals the mat board so that when you paint it, it doesn't absorb a lot of paint, which could possibly cause the material to swell up a little bit. So sealing it first, make sure that doesn't happen. Another thing this does, which is just a kind of a happy byproduct of the process, is that it actually soaks into the material, hardens, and makes the entire model just a little harder. If you can imagine the same process with fiberglassing, where they lay down fabric and impregnate it with a resin, the resin cures, and now that what was a flexible fabric before is now a very stiff material. It's kind of the same idea with this. We have a substrate material here that the lacquer soaks into and then hardens, basically sort of plasticizing the material, making it more like a plastic. So it just makes it a little stronger at the same time that it seals it. So what I do is I spray it from several different angles, inside and out, and just let it dry. It only takes a couple of minutes. This dries very fast. If you're in a real big hurry, you can just hit it with a heat gun and that'll speed it up. This is the aerosol, and it's a lacquer base, and that's what I prefer to use. There is also a water-based formula that a lot of different companies make. This one is from Minwax. It's also a sanding sealer. And it's actually, this is a bottle of it here, it's actually kind of a white consistency and it dries clear. This is a great material and it's great for certain applications, but I don't like using it on the mat board because when it's a liquid like this, you're going to probably brush it on. And when you brush it on, you're liable to put way too much and it'll probably soak into the material too much, and that could actually cause a little bit of swelling of the material. Now, if you have an airbrush or a small spray gun and you want to spray this stuff on, that's great. You can do that. Spray it on, light coats, don't flood it, and it'll be fine. So if you want to use the water-based sanding sealer, fine. I just don't recommend brushing it. I have spray guns, I have airbrushes, I have all that, but I find this just so much handier just to grab this can and spray it. So that's what I use. It's going to cost you a little more than the water base. I can't remember what this is, but I think it's around $8 a can. That water base is probably about the same price, but it's going to last you about 10 times longer. So now we've got the model built. Pretend we've sprayed it with some sanding sealer and it's all sealed. Let's jump ahead. This is a model that I just put together yesterday out of MatBoard. I've sprayed it with the sealer. So the very next step, most of these steps are, I'm going to say they're optional. I'm just going to tell you the way I do it. The sanding sealer is optional. The next step is also optional. I like to take a little putty, a little wood filler, and fill in all the little gaps and little holes and things where the tongue and grooves have gone together, where pieces meet. There might be a little gap or something. So I like to fill those in. I've experimented with a lot of wood fillers since I started laser cutting MDF kits and MatBoard kits. I've tried probably about a dozen different wood fillers. This is the best one I've found. It's made by Elmers. It's their part number E855 in white. The problem I found with a lot of wood fillers is the water-based plaster type spackle products soak up so much paint that they're kind of a pain to use. They go on fine, they sand fine, but then when you paint them, they just soak up paint like crazy, and it's a real pain. This does not do that as much. A lot of the other wood filler products from Elmers and a lot of the other companies, a lot of them have something in them that makes them extra strong, which is not necessary for us. Makes them a little thicker, and almost there's sort of a grit to them. There's something in them that I don't know what it is, but it makes them a little gritty, and I find it doesn't go on very smoothly. This particular white number, like I said, it's E855, goes on real smooth, sands real nicely, and does not soak up a lot of paint. So I have a little spatula thing here, and I just take this material here, put a little bit on, take my model, and wherever there's parts that have come together, I'll just put a little bit of this on. I scrape most of it off, by the way. You'll see I put a bunch on and then scrape most of it off. That's going to cut down on the amount of sanding I have to do. And on a really tiny model like this, you don't want to do a lot of sanding. And also with MatBoard, you don't want to sand through the sanding sealer and into the actual paper product. When you do that, it gets kind of fuzzy and kind of weird, so you want to kind of avoid that. So don't use a lot of putty and wipe a lot of it off before it's cured. And that's how quickly this stuff goes on. Like you can see, that's all been puttied. A little while ago I did this side, and this is all dry, so we'll just pretend we did that and now it's all dry. So once the putty dries, it comes off real easy. I use a wet dry sandpaper, about a 220 grit. 220 to 320 would be fine. Maybe even a 180 would be fine. You just don't want anything too rough because it'll scratch up the surface you're working on. A little sanding block is sometimes handy. What you want to do with this stuff, as I was saying earlier, is you want to sand it very lightly just to get this putty knocked down. Now I'm doing these pieces right here, just enough to get the excess off. Very lightly. If you really sand into this, you're going to sand through the putty, through the sanding sealer, and into the MatBoard, and it's going to get fuzzy, and you're going to have problems later on when you go to paint it. It's not going to look very good. So as you can see, it sands off really easily. When you get into really small areas like this, you'll probably want to take a piece and fold it up. Just get in there and sand those down. Again, only as much as you need to. Don't go crazy with the sanding. This is really hard to do while holding it, trying to keep it pointed at the camera. But that's how quickly it sands down, assuming you didn't use too much. There's a little bit in here I want to get. And a few more spots over here. Now I could probably fine-tune that a little more, and I would have puttied everything and sanded everything, but this is just a quick demo. Now assuming that you've done this, you've put the putty on, you've sanded it all down, and you think it all looks really good, what I like to do now is go with the sanding sealer just one more time, just to seal that putty, and in case you sanded into the paper at all anywhere. So I just put a real quick coat of this on. Let me just set this down. I'll just do it right here. Normally I'd put on gloves and everything, but we're just going to do this real quick here. Now what that's going to do is seal that putty so that the putty doesn't do what I was talking about before, where it soaks up the paint a lot. So now that we have the model assembled, one coat of sanding sealer, putty, sanding, one more coat of sanding sealer, now what I like to do is spray it with a primer. Now you can go straight on with paint right now if you want, but I like to primer everything that I do with a gray primer. A lot of different reasons why I like to do that, but it gives me a really good idea of what the model looks like before I start putting my real paint job on it. If I put the primer on now and I see a problem spot, it's not too late to go back and fix it. If I get out the airbrush and mix up a color paint I want and start painting it, and then I find an area that looks horrible, I kind of have to take a few steps back. So at this point, I spray on a coat of primer. My favorite primer comes out of an aerosol can from Rust-Oleum. It's their automotive gray primer. It's my favorite. I use it on almost everything. So here's what a model looks like at this stage. It's been assembled, sealed, puttied, sanded, sealed again, and then primered. Now you can look at it and say, okay, that's good enough. Now if at this point you see an area after you put the primer on, if you see an area that looks like it's kind of fuzzy, that's an area that you probably sanded too much. Now those fuzzies that are sticking up are now impregnated with sanding sealer and Rust-Oleum primer. So I can't find any on this one, fortunately, but just imagine there were some here. If you just take your sandpaper and just go very lightly, just a couple of swipes, that'll knock down that fuzz. And you may, if you want, you can put on another coat of primer to check it, but you'll be good at that point. Now once you're at this point, it's been primered with the Rust-Oleum gray auto primer. Now you can paint it with anything you want. You can use water-based paints, acrylics, oils, enamels, other spray paints, whatever you want. It doesn't matter, because now it's completely sealed. It's got a coat of primer on it, so you're not spraying onto any exposed, raw material. So this model here and this one actually as well were both sprayed with a textured spray paint. This is a really cool trick if you haven't done a perfect job of puttying, or maybe you don't want to putty at all. Maybe you just want to put the thing together and spray it one color and be done with it. This textured paint actually hides a lot of very small imperfections, or things that didn't line up quite right, or any small gaps. Not sure if you can tell on video. I might have to insert a still photo here, but this is actually a textured surface. And a lot of different companies make this kind of stuff. This is a Rust-Oleum multicolored textured paint, and it actually has a texture to it. You can feel it. This is actually the exact can that I used to spray this. Sprayed it right on, did nothing else. If you don't like this color, you can spray it on to get the texture and then paint it with whatever you want on top of that, as long as you don't put a big huge thick coat of paint on and destroy that texture. You'll be fine. This is an example of that. This I sprayed with the textured paint, and then I airbrushed the entire model with the color that I wanted. And that textured paint really adds a lot to the model. It doesn't look so flat and smooth. Some models you want that look. These sort of ultra-modern sci-fi type buildings, you want a nice smooth texture to them. But this is like a Middle Eastern building. This is the Target building from the movie Black Hawk Down, and this is the type of building would have a textured, some sort of stucco finish or whatever. So that kind of adds to the realism of it. So that's another really cool trick right there. I think that's about it. I'll post up a graphic at the end of the video that goes through the steps, but again, it's just gluing together with Tacky Glue, spraying a coat of sealer to seal everything, putting the putty on if you like to cover up all the joints and things like that, sanding the putty off with some 320, 220, somewhere around there, fine grit sandpaper, sealing it one more time with the lacquer sanding sealer, putting an optional coat of primer on if you want to check it out before you start painting it, and then painting it with whatever color you want, or perhaps even a textured finish. So that should do it. That's your MatBoard tutorial. I really love this material. I have the option here, of course, of using just about any material I want. I can make all these kits out of acrylic if I want. I can make them in larger scales in MDF and stuff like that. But I really enjoy working with this stuff because it's so easy. There's no odor to it. I mean, this glue is odorless, the material's odorless. You get into these things and of course then you've got a problem. But I can sit at my desk in the house and build these using this glue, and I'm not disturbing anybody. I'm not making a big stink in there. And I can just sit there all night and put together, you know, a whole bunch of buildings, and then I'll come out to the shop the next day and spray the sealer on them. So it's pretty cool material and works nice. It is technically a paper product, but it's very durable. I don't know if you could, you know, throw an elbow into it and not damage it, but I've had buildings like this fall off the edge of the table and bounce around on the floor a few times, and they come back just fine. So there you go. If you have any questions while assembling any of your kits, if you need to know where to find any of these different materials, just email me. I'll send you some links, but they're all very easy to find. If you go on Amazon, you can get this wood filler. You can also get the Deft lacquer sanding sealer on Amazon. These things are available in your Home Depot stores, things like that. Tacky Glue is available in almost any craft store. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll give it a try. Some MatBoard kits. Start off with something really simple, like, you know, your four-sided ruined buildings, and then, you know, you can work your way up to, you know, something along these lines here. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it.